Artificial intelligence is no longer a distant frontier. Financial institutions in Luxembourg are steering towards AI, reshaping their operations, risk management, and client services. But the road is far from straightforward. Questions around evolving regulations, building trust, and the role of human oversight remain central. In this episode of TechTalk, we explore these topics, from the EU AI Act to collaboration and moving from experimentation to real-world use with our two fascinating guests. Ulf Herbig, Chairman of the European Fund and Asset Management Association AI Task Force and Chairman of the Association of the Luxembourg Fund Industry Digital Finance Working Group on Innovation and Technology, and Sébastien Schmitt, Partner in Regulatory Risk and Compliance at PwC Luxembourg. I'm your host, Christopher Rosa, and this is Tech Talk. Technology made simple over a cup of coffee. So grab your favorite beverage and let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Tech Talk. Today we are going to talk about how financial services are adopting AI. So we will talk about navigating regulatory uncertainty, building trust, and also explore real-world use cases and scale beyond experimentation. So many topics.
Yes, and again, a fascinating topic. And to navigate this matter, we're joined by two fascinating guests. We have Sébastien and Ulf, who will bring us their valuable insights on the topic. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Great. So as usual, before we kick things off, if you can tell us a bit more about yourselves and why you are here today.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Ulf Herbig. I'm a seasoned expert with close to 20 years of experience in financial services and asset management. I'm chairman of the EFAMA AI Task Force, as well as in Luxembourg of ALFI's Digital Finance Working Group for Innovation and Technology.
And I'm Sébastien Schmitt. So I'm a partner in regulatory risk and compliance at PwC. I'm mainly assisting management companies, AFM, and the financial sector to comply with different regulation. But as a funny fact, I can share about me, I didn't study law, actually. I studied statistics at school and university. So that's why AI became quite a natural topic for me. And I'm also in the groups that are animated and chaired by Ulf in the EFAMA task force on AI.
Yeah, I can confirm Sebastian is quite an active member.
Great.
Fantastic. So let's get started. Luxembourg's regulator, the CSSF, so let me say it in French, Commission de Surveillance du Secteur Financier, together with the Banque Centrale de Luxembourg, or BCL. Was it good?
Perfect.
Thank you. With my Portuguese accent. So the CSSF and the BCL recently ran a survey on the use of AI in Luxembourg's financial sector. So my question is, what stood out to you in those results, and what do they tell us about where the industry is today?
One of the key facts that impressed me in that survey is that mainly the investment on AI and Gen AI are made at group level. Mm-hmm. Same for the team deploying this technology, the data scientists and so on. They are also at group level. So what does it mean? It means that it's not in Luxembourg, in our country. It's outside. And I think it's quite an important fact, and maybe quite a challenge as well for our country. It is when you rely on outside world to deploy, to invest in technology. And here you can touch, I think, the specificity of Luxembourg. Another element that I think we should highlight is that 36% of the companies that have been surveyed did not make any investment in innovative tech. By innovative tech, it's embed AI, but not only, it also on blockchain. And that percentage is higher for Mancos and AFM. So here you can also have, first the challenge regarding the country, and after in terms of investment locally, you see it's even if it's increasing, it's still a bit low. And regarding specifically our topic of today regarding AI adoption or AI in production, we can see that only 28% are using AI in production. So it means that most of the company who made these investment in innovative tech, they are still quite a lot in test environment, in POC mode, and not yet achieve, the stage of production. Last, and I will let the mic to Ulf. Last point I would like to highlight is we have seen in that survey that 60% of companies have not yet in place an AI policy. Or you will look at me and say, okay, AI policy, again, a procedure, a piece of paper, and so that. But actually, it means something else. Because to have an AI policy, it means that you need to have first an AI governance.
Yep.
You need to have an AI strategy. Otherwise, what you will write in an AI policy. So we can have also the impression that the topic about governance, strategy, how you frame, how you deploy AI internally in your company, for the moment, is still not at the level we should be.
Yeah, let me pick up the points you mentioned, Sébastien, because I think one other fact that came through from the survey was that only 25% of the boards in Luxembourg have actually approved digital strategies. And even if you go beyond the borders at group level, where often the group headquarters are, only 50% of the digital strategies were approved there. So now you could draw the conclusion from exactly what you just said regarding policies and all of these things. Well, if there may not even be a digital strategy, how then there can be a policy and the governance and all these other things around? I think clearly AI literacy, AI policies and governance is a key aspect to work on and where firms need to improve. And we'll come later on in this podcast to other dimensions of what that actually means. But another fact that I would like to highlight also was that most of the use cases, and when I say most, it's actually the vast majority with 90% are internal use cases even. Only 10% are external use cases, typically customer service chatbots and these things, which I think shows a bit we work in a regulated industry. Most firms are regulated entities, and therefore it's quite a sensitive approach to say, hey, let's start with AI internally first before we expose ourselves to the outside world, gain experience and all these other things. And then the last point that I wanted to highlight also was the survey was looking into what type of AI technologies the firms are using. And interestingly, the majority said we're using generative AI. With more than 60%. Half of the 60%, so close to 30%, is only using machine learning. And why is that? Well, it's probably because the generative AI, and most people know them from ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini, and you know them, typical large language models. You don't really need to install a lot. You don't need a lot of data. You can just type and keep it going. While for machine learning, you need a lot of data. And data is one of the key challenges, clearly. And it can lead quite to a lot of investment. So for me, that's a rather logical explanation why most firms start, at least, also with generative AI and not move into other AI technologies such as machine learning.
Maybe an easy but unlisted question. Can our auditors find the link to that survey somewhere, the results somewhere, if they need to find more?
Yeah, you just use ChatGPT with the search function, because we don't use Google anymore. And you can ask, find me the last survey dated of May, I think 2025, from the BCL and CSSF.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I said auditors, but I meant listeners. Auditors is in French.
Something
Voilà.
else.
Yeah, I meant auditor.
Of course.
Okay.
And
Anyway.
you find it also directly straight on the website of the CSSF.
Parfait. Parfait. So now that the scenes are set, let's look at, let's say, the impact of these regulations. So of course the EU AI Act is the first regulatory framework in the world, and we will see similar frameworks emerging globally. But what particular impact do you think this evolving regulatory landscape is or will have, let's say, on financial institutions that are looking to adopt AI and Gen AI?
I think the first part of your question is very, very interesting. You mentioned, about tech regulation. So here the question is, should we have, tech-specific regulation? For instance, all the case we have in law court today regarding AI are not using AI Act. They are using GDPR or copyright directive, which are, tech-neutral regulation. However, I think one of the main problems with AI, with Gen AI adoption, is a problem regarding trust. Can we trust those techniques, those softwares? And I think here there is definitely a place for regulation, because what regulation can bring is really this element of trust, for companies to adopt AI. Now it's true that the real challenge for us as Europeans, given this global context, is where do you find the balance, between regulation, compliance cost, and trust and adoption. And honestly, that's something very difficult to achieve. And I think we are still on that process to find the right balance between innovation, regulation, and trust. Maybe last word before giving the place to Ulf. I think what is crucial is really that we have stability. Stability regarding the regulatory landscape. We should not have, movement back and forth regarding what the regulator should expect. That is really crucial for our companies, for our sector, for our country, to make the necessary investment and after to stick into it to have this innovation.
Yeah, I would also complement what Sébastien said by the EU AI Act, for example, is a new regulatory framework. And I've been working in the regulatory space since nearly 2 decades now. And you've had PRIPS and MiFID and SFDR and all these other regulations where always when they came out, everyone was, first of all, uncertain, and people had to dig into what does it really mean and how do I read the regulatory text, what is the impact for my organization. So bringing that now on the topic of AI, that means exactly the same. And that's why I'm quite sure one of the reasons that we see an improved level of adoption compared to the survey that was done by the CSSF before, but still not at the level where it actually should be in terms of adoption, is on the one hand, uncertainty, and Sébastien spoke about stability and clarification that we need, but on the other hand also lack of experience. And I don't mean experience in a technical sense, but more in a regulatory and compliance sense. Because of course all these internal departments for legal and compliance and so on, they were never really confronted with a tech regulation. They knew about DORA and GDPR and these things, and now they have an EU AI Act that in some instances is quite technical, and they have to get familiar with these things. So that's where I think now suddenly IT and legal and compliance have the need to get closer together to understand each other better, so that by giving, Sébastien spoke about trust, by giving trust and comfort to the legal and compliance departments that the technology teams know what they do, that then we enable innovation in the guardrails set by the EU AI Act and within the boundaries of internal governance rules.
Maybe just one thing I would like also to add, because since 2 years we heard a lot, and I'm sure you have hearing as well, is that, US is the first to innovate, China is the first to copy, and EU is the first to regulate. And we are all, a bit laughing or, with the... Yeah. But however, in the US, when the new administration was elected, the first thing they did is to deregulate, especially on AI. What happened is that now the regulatory initiative is within the state. So we have a new regulation in Utah, in California, and so on. So basically what will happen is that instead to have one federal framework in the US, you can end up with 50. And that's why in Europe, as we are, 27 countries, there was a need to have at least a common framework. So when an entity is coming in Luxembourg, in France, in Germany, but there are no three different rules.
Yeah.
There is no three different regime. Bad or good, at least we have, a common place, a common understanding. And I think it's always easy, to mock about regulation, especially when it comes from the one who don't want to be regulated, so the tech companies. It reminds me a bit, maybe it's not a good example, but the tobacco companies at that back in the time in the 70s, they are also the first one, to lobby, to invest in publicity and so on against regulation. Yeah. And I think since ChatGPT has been released in 2022, we have also touched the misuse of AI and how the potential it has. Yeah. Deepfakes, influence of election, all those many examples we have seen, and I think we can all understand that we need to frame it. We need to have this trust. And I think, yes, maybe we were the first to regulate, but we are not the only one. All initiatives now are happening across the world regarding framing AI.
And I think also in order to increase the trust in the technology and to foster innovation, let's promote more the successful examples of use of AI and not just put in the news where there was, you mentioned deep fakes and these things, where there was misuse of AI, right? Because I think, of course, it may get more viewers and readers and listeners when you can talk about something bad that happened. And this has always happened with every technology that was misused. When the internet was introduced, there were also scams right away with fake shops and people were buying goods that were never existing. So I think let's start promoting more the positive impacts and the positive examples so that people see, hey, it really adds value.
True. I think it's a fair point. But to go back, let's say to regulation, and when we speak about regulation, we have to speak about compliance as well. And I think in our preparation meeting, Ulf, you mentioned something that was quite interesting that we want to go deeper in. So you mentioned that compliance isn't a competitive advantage, that it's a shared obligation, and that when it comes to new regulatory frameworks like the EU AI Act, collaboration is key. So can you tell us what that collaboration might look like in practice?
Yeah, I think the statement came because of the fact that I think compliance is an imperative, right? We work in the regulated environment, and most of the firms in our industry are regulated industries. So it's just a no to not be compliant, right? And that's why all firms obviously want and need to follow the rules. At the same time, and this is where I always compare AI a bit with ESG, it's about trust and transparency. So on the one hand, you can say you are compliant because you say I'm managing an Article 8 or Article 9 ESG fund that has sustainable objectives. But is that really enough to then produce the regulatory disclosures in order to attract investors? If you want to attract a lot of money from institutional investors, then likely you are even going beyond what is regulatory required. Now, building the bridge to AI, it's going to be a bit the same. You have the EU AI Act, and of course you can say to all of your customers in your internal legal departments, you're compliant with the EU AI Act. But what does it actually mean? Does this statement give trust to your customers, to your internal departments? I personally don't think so. So therefore, firms have to rather think about measures they can implement to demonstrate to the outside world even more so that they are compliant, not just saying it. Sebastian, we spoke about the policy thing, right? So now, why not demonstrating that you have this policy and showcase this even more? Why not having an explainable and transparent AI where you can say, look, I'm having an algorithm here, and many times people speak about the so-called black box effect in using AI. But what does that really mean? So if I want to prompt data, and I can give you the thought of, or the path of thought from the AI, which means like all the calculations up to the result, then I'm fully transparent to how AI was determining the result. And so it is with many other things. At the beginning, people were using ChatGPT without thinking about copyright protection and all of these things, and ChatGPT wasn't even giving you the source where the information comes from. I don't think that it's a trustworthy AI if you don't know where the information actually came from. But these are all certain features certainly that come into, and where if you're it's in the EU AI Act, there is a distinction between deployer and provider.
Yep.
I think even as a deployer, you need to be transparent towards your end users in whatever shape or form. And that, in my eyes, goes beyond simply I do a risk classification under the EU AI Act and I follow all the transparency requirements. My advice would be simply follow what the demand from your customers, from the market is in terms of transparency and explainability.
So it's not just ticking the box, but
Precisely. On one last point then, although the EU AI office had mentioned in one of their YouTube webinars that there isn't any plans to issue a European certification, for example. So therefore, there is other measures firms can take, such as the ISO certification on AI management systems, for example.
And you mentioned, transparency, and you took example of ESG. There is the famous word we talk about, about greenwashing.
Yep.
I don't know if you saw recently, we have now also AI washing.
Oh, really? I didn't know about it.
Yeah, with that company called Builders, I think Builders.ai,
right.
who scammed Microsoft and Amazon, and actually was in reality using 700 people in India.
Wow.
So yes, so I think clearly the trend will be, this is a trend we observe since now decades, about transparency, improving transparency. And AI will not be an exception on that topic.
I'm sure.
And what I really appreciated on the initiative we have together at EFAMA, but also at ALFI, is this collaboration within the industry, okay, to set market standard between the different players of the industry. Collaborate with the regulator, and you mentioned it, Ulf. We engage also with the regulator. Innovation will not come from them, that's for sure, and they acknowledge that, they know that, but they really appreciate as well to have feedback from the market and assist them, to set standards. So, yes, definitely, I think there is a need for collaboration and foster transparency on that topic within the financial service here.
And your question had these two components, right? On the one hand, competitive advantage. Yes. On the other hand, collaboration. So I also spoke about the competitive advantage thing, and what Sébastien said. I would want to add even that Sébastien and many other experts have been instrumental within EFAMA's AI task force, for example, to develop Europe's first AI system assessment tool, which is, you could call it in brackets, a simple Excel, but it's actually a structured way that helps firms of any sizes to start documenting and assessing their AI use cases against the EU AI Act, MiFID II, DORA, and GDPR. And that was only possible in actually a really short period of time, within 3-4 months, where we have created and developed that, because of the collaboration of corporate members, associate members. Then we had other national associations such as ALFI or the BVI or the IA, who brought that back into their associations, discussed it with their members. And we have seen similar things in the past with an industry body that is called Findatex on other regulations such as PRIPS and MiFID and SFDR, where they created data standards. And now we have simply created a standard on documenting AI systems. And my last point then in terms of collaboration is also that whilst I think we have proven yet again that we have strong collaboration within the industries themselves, meaning all the national associations, also ALFI is at the forefront of digital finance working groups, the regulators are opening up more and more and more. And that really over the past 20 years, I've noticed quite recently that you have these public events where the CSSF and the BCL presented the survey results, where we even have this dialogue on topics. The EU AI office makes YouTube live webinars and live sessions, and we have more and more consultations. So that really means that also European and national competent authorities seek the dialogue with the industry, which we very much welcome. And I think it can only be in the interest of everyone to contribute to that dialogue because it helps the regulator to form guardrails that then are actually fostering rather than hindering innovation.
Well, I would like to go back to trust, and this is also linked to transparency, which you both mentioned several times. So in financial services, as we know, trust is everything. How would you define trustworthy NI in this context, and what does it take to earn trust, that trust?
Maybe to precise, in Luxembourg, it's a specific context, financial sector. So meaning that most of what we do in Luxembourg is not client-facing, meaning that we are more talking about middle office, back office operation. Taking example, it's calculating NAV, it's transfer agency, it's managing asset, and so on. So here the trust is clearly critical, because if you embed AI in those process, you need to ensure that it's reliable, that it will not hallucinate when you will extract information to do, for example, your AML KYC process. But yes, that could be
bad.
Indeed. So here there is two things. When those models, this public model was released, I think there were studies about the level of accuracy, and they were at, I don't remember, but something 60%. And it's not at the level that we can expect to have them in a professional process. But technology has evolved so fast. So I remember at that time, we had to put some patches a bit everywhere to make it work. A rag, in English actually means also carpet. So we have to put carpet on things to make it work, to make it fit for purposes. But what we have observed since 2 years now, it's crazy rapid evolution of that technology. Now we are talking about agentic AI, the AI that can connect with different systems. So in terms of level of accuracy, so back again of one of the elements of trust is also the level of accuracy you can expect from this model. It's really improving. Embedded in the different process, you need as well to put metrics, you need to put features that will allow the expert, the human, the employee as well to control, to oversee the process. And that is back again to the AI Act regulation. There is this concept of human in the loop that is really, really important. That we still need to have this expert involved during the process to ensure that AI is behaving as expected. So one of the elements of trust, an additional one, is to have still this expert in the loop. To have this in the loop, indeed, at which time, at which part of the process it needs to be involved. How do you define that? Through internal policies, internal procedure. So we are back a bit at the introduction of our first point. One of the last elements of trust in a professional context is again to have an AI framework, an AI governance in place, and to have internal policy, a list of do's and don'ts, that will frame how you use AI internally, how you use AI in your process, to have this element of trust that is critical in our business.
Yeah, I would say for me, trustworthy AI has many different phases because it depends really on the stakeholder who you talk with, who will give you very different criteria of what for them actually trustworthy AI means, right? If you talk to an IT person that is on the data security side, well, they may rather focus on monitoring unauthorized model behavior or encryption, anonymization of sensitive data. Same for a data protection officer. If you speak to a business person or to a compliance officer, they may rather say, do I have audit trails? Can I trace back where the information was found? So yet again, I think be clear who are your stakeholders and what their expectations in terms of trustworthy AI actually are. And making the link yet again to the CSSF survey, the biggest challenge on AI was with over 60% of respondents confirming this data. And in the end, you have to ask yourself the question, can I trust my data? If you can't trust your data, how can you trust your AI? With the best governance, with the best models in the world, if you have bad quality data, you can only get bad quality outcome, politically correct said. and then comes the point on the explainability, so that when I'm asking for a calculation, I may not just get the calculated result, but also a file separate where I can actually trace back what was the calculation process. So to conclude on the trustworthy bit really is, AI is not just I develop a bit of code and then I put it out there, but the monitoring bit, so that whatever I've successfully tested, that it meets my quality standards. Sebastian, you spoke about 60% of accuracy. I think a use case in a regulatory environment, 60% is just not good enough, right? You won't go live with a use case that gives you a success rate of 60%. But even if you hit 90% and north of 90%, what does that mean when you go live? And that, I think, is the biggest difference between, let's say, regular software development, where you say, I want to have a green button on that screen, and whenever I click the button, then I'm performing this action in the back. The only thing that IT teams then, after successful testing, then usually do is the service up and running. But afterwards, they expect this to always happen like this. In an AI solution, trustworthiness means also to monitor the quality and accuracy over time. And that suddenly requires a feedback mechanism and measures, like you spoke about them, Sebastian, that you can say, I'm not just starting and I'm not just signing off with north of 90%, but in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months time, I'm still at that level of the quality.
Can I ask an unlisted question on trustworthiness and accuracy? Do we, paradoxically, I would say, do we expect more accuracy, or are we satisfied with are we only satisfied with a higher level of accuracy with AI than we would be with people? Or
But it's natural to be more demanding on the machine than the human. I mean, that's normal, and that's what we should expect. But again, if we look a bit backward, the trend of evolution is really impressive. And I think, Ulf, you mentioned 80 or 90%. I think, indeed, nowadays, we are at this level of accuracy when it's plugged again, back to what you mentioned also, to correct data framework with a proper data governance, because there is no magic. It's still technology, and if you plug in on bad data, it's garbage in, garbage out. But honestly, what we can observe is really the speed of evolution, the speed of transformation, of increasing in terms of reliability and accuracy. It's quite impressive.
Okay, then to go back to the listed question, I would say we were talking about the human in the loop, right? And of course, well, AI as a whole, is often framed as a powerful productivity tool, I would say, and I think it's fair. But in many processes, as you were saying, Seb, in the financial services, they still rely heavily on human inputs and on human oversights. But then how do you strike the right balance between AI and human oversights and inputs in the field to keep the critical role of human and human judgment there?
Well, I think we need first to state what is the global context. Global context is really a race toward efficiency and a cost decreasing. Now, we come from a world where we were globalization, collaboration between the different places, and now we are entering in a world where we have deglobalization and more competitiveness between the different places. And here, for Luxembourg, a small country within Europe, but with a huge advantage regarding fund domicile, with operation in financial sector, there is a clear challenge is to remain relevant in the years to come. And to remain relevant in the years to come, AI is not a choice. It's mandatory to remain pertinent, to remain competitive. Yes, you're right. Many processes are still deeply manual. And I would say maybe in some cases not efficient. Maybe you know that in our sector, in financial services, still in 2025, fax are used for some entities. In 2025. In 2025, we still have nav error. We still have active breaches. So I think there is still room for improvement, and there is room here for AI to take a place, to be faster at a lower cost. That's the promise. Indeed, human will be still required, first to define the instruction, and also to ensure, like we just mentioned, that everything goes as expected, and keeping that, that critical thinking to judge, review, and validate or amend the output of AI. Now, we have to admit, and here I don't have the answer, unfortunately, that those processes, those race regarding efficiency and competitivity will have certainly an impact on the workforce, on the job offer. That's for sure. What is the level? I don't have the answer yet.
I would say the word to use here is augment the work, right? Because people should not be scared of their jobs being taken away, but rather augmented. Yep. Because I think we all hate to do repetitive tasks that are boring, and then we say like, oh, couldn't we automate? And even in the past with robotics and things like this, people have started automating repetitive tasks. Now, the one discussion we had in the different industry groups when you spoke about human oversight was the distinction between human in the loop and expert in the loop. Because to make it really practical, as an example, you can have a generic knowledge base and put a chatbot on it and allow all employees of your organization to prompt that chatbot. So now you have a human in the loop because, of course, every employee is allowed and entitled to prompt this knowledge base. But these employees are not the experts of what they are prompting there. Means that if I have a question of what's the entrance policy of our building, then I'm not the one who wrote the policy, but I have to trust the result that I get. That is a human in the loop, right? But when I have an expert in the loop, it's a different thing. So you can have a targeted knowledge base, let's say within your legal department, and this agent, for example, has access to all these internal contracts. So now the legal team prompts information from these legal contracts or want to do an analysis. Now they are the actual experts of the domain. So they understand, and they can rather, with a higher probability, verify, is there a hallucination in the response that I get? And is there accuracy in the response that I get versus the generic one where I just prompt an information on a domain where I'm not the expert. And I think that's a bit where we need to draw the line between human oversight, and my last point would also be just because we have a human in the loop, even if it is an expert, doesn't guarantee quality over time. Yeah. So there is this fatigueness of over-reliance on AI, where even the expert may say over time, I click approve because the check was successful 100 times and the 101st it will be successful as well. No. Then people who build AI systems also need to think about the human component in this process to basically introduce, for example, false negatives, where you can build statistics over time. How often has the human actually detected the intentional false negative? So the result could be the human has an over-reliance on AI and therefore does not pay attention, or the human is actually not the expert and needs training because there may have been other reasons why the human was not able to detect the false negative.
Maybe to add something here, because that's really interesting, this concept of expert. But to become an expert, and I think here at PwC we all know that very well, you need to go through, you learn the job by doing, Yes. You have a little portion which is learning, but also by doing. If AI is replacing, those lower branches of the task force, let's put it like that, the trainee, the junior, how do you become an expert if you didn't go through that process? So by removing that, lower end brick in the workforce, how do you become an expert? How do you train if AI is doing that specific piece? I don't have the answer again, but that will be also one of the challenges we will face in the years to come, that's for sure.
So I'm sure you have the answer for the next question.
I hope so.
Let's see. So what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions or blind spots financial institutions have when they start experimenting with AI, Gen AI?
I would say it's not specific to financial institution. It may be more to corporate. The first one, that would be an advice, is stop looking for use cases. I always heard that. Use cases, what are the use cases and so on. And even you go back to the BCL and CSSF survey, they talk about AI use cases. And actually when you go through that report, you don't find any. You find family of use cases. So what I want to say is that instead of looking for use cases, look for patterns. So repetitive patterns you see. Yeah. For example, data extraction is one of the main patterns we have with Gen AI. So look in the different role and responsibilities of your different employee where this pattern fit. And after, because even if the technology is becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, you still have resources to involve, you still need to run a project, so there is an investment. Yeah. And in front of an investment, you have to measure ROI, a return investment. So if you just look at, siloed use cases, you will never achieve that ROI. But by mutualizing all those different, patterns you have identified across your different processes, then you can achieve that ROI. One of the really other advice I would give is go through cross-domain capabilities and not look at the risk function is doing that, compliance function is doing that, oversight function is doing that. No, try to look that, again, back to my example of data extraction, look to cross-domain capabilities. Last thing, and after I will let you, Ulf, complement my answer, but I heard a lot of POC, and a lot of POC are also blocked at POC stage. I don't know if you remember, we welcomed Luc Julliard during the Journée de l'économie here at PwC, and he mentioned an interesting fact is that in the CAC 40 companies, they have identified, 150 POC running per company, and only 7 were in production. Wow. So you see the gap. So here my recommendation is forget POC, start to build. Build small, but go already with starting building with the intention, to scale, to be in production.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with all of what was said before. One other misconception is probably also that there is this thinking of AI is always a huge investment and it's super expensive. No, I mean, if you go with the hyperscalers and start with their board ready-made products, I mean, you have Copilot, Gemini, ChatGPT, and you name them. We can probably name many, many more. In Europe, we have Mistral, for example, with Le Chat, and so on. Then you can just buy subscriptions there, and like Sébastien was saying, get it started. And that started doesn't mean that you have to build high sophisticated AI systems. Your people have to start crawling, then walking, and only then you can run. And don't start with the marathon right away as a sprint, because it is a marathon, right? Don't sprint. You warm yourself up. And this is what you have to do with your people. And you can obviously then, in terms of misconceptions, also feel that when people follow individual use cases without looking at the bigger picture, like Sébastien was saying, these capabilities, then you will actually realize that your initial investment in a certain capability, which may appear high, is actually exponential decreasing the more use cases you can piggyback on such a capability. And I think that's really for firms to take away. Don't look at that one-off investment. Look at the capability and what else you could do with it, because then suddenly the ROI becomes much more interesting rather than looking at a use case ROI.
So talking about marathon and sprints, but I mean, it's true, but people then have to start. I think that's key as well, that you have to start, and goes with what you were saying. You have to start the journey and start building already. But let's look now at the future, talking about starting. How do you see the AI journey evolving in the financial sector, and more specifically as well, what would be the next steps for an institution that is looking to move from this, let's say, experimentation steps to full-scale adoption?
But I would start with, guys, we are living exciting times. Being in the financial sector for now almost 20 years, actually we didn't have seen a tech revolution happening in our sector for the past 20, 30 years. Like I mentioned earlier, we still have for some operation, the fax. We still have manual processes happening with error and things like that. We are, for example, in settlement, we are still at T+2 or sometimes T+3. But we are at the dawn of a real transformation of our sector. 2 days ago, we had the Nexus event. We had Coinbase announcing that they are opening a branch here in Luxembourg. So we are really at the dawn of a fully technological transformation of our sector with AI, but also with blockchain. The two together will really transform the way we operate, the way we work. So again, AI is not a choice. It's mandatory to keep being relevant. I'm sure that the company that will listen this podcast, they don't want to be seen as, the next Nokia or Kodak of the financial sector. Yeah. But what is at the stake, actually. Yeah. It's what is at stake. So clearly, they need to get it started. They need to get it bold, especially in Luxembourg, given, the specific landscape we are in, with most of the decision, the data scientists being outside. We need to bring a piece or a part of that back to Luxembourg to remain pertinent and relevant. That will be the challenge for our place and our sector for the years to come.
And I think it's not just about the institutions themselves only, because the Nexus was a great example of the ecosystem in Luxembourg, right? Because an institution may not be able to scale their AI internally or to the outside world if the regulatory framework isn't clear. We spoke about stability. If there isn't partners with whom they can work with to get access to all this skill set that is needed to use modern technology, but also from a government maybe to get funding for innovation. So I think there is many different dimensions around institutions that contribute to whether or not and how fast we are going to adapt this technology. And I think that's where in Luxembourg we need to really leverage the fact that we are all close together. We have a very tight ecosystem which is expanding, which is great, and we have short paths to decision making, and that we have to leverage.
I think your answers are perfect to close this episode. However, I still would like to ask you one last question. So, and that is, what is your key takeaway or advice you would like to share with the audience, especially for those who are just starting their journey?
I think we all say that is a start now. Don't underestimate governance. Governance is key. Otherwise, you can have, effort wasted, replication of initiative, doing the same thing not in a proper order. So that's something really key. Define your risk appetite, define your strategy, and after, embed that in your whole corporate strategy. I think, like I said, don't look at use case, really go for cross-domain pattern. That will be key. And start to try, start to build. And I'm sure that you will see the benefit of having those process automated. And maybe my last word is that because, again, we cannot, forget the landscape where we are. I think we really need to have a regulatory agenda which is clear, stable, for the company to have this visibility on the years to come to start to invest in that technology.
I'd have for the institutions 3 advices. The first one is form a plan. right? Really have a strategy, a governance, principles and compliance requirements in place. Get access to knowledge, whether it's recruitment or partners, to form the plan and translate that into reality and get it started as a third one. That really is it for the institutions. And thinking about the ecosystem again, there really my advice is keep on collaborating as the industry and associations and regulators have really done in the past months, because that is vital if we want to remain competitive even in a global context.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to end. So thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you on the podcast for this episode. So Carla, this is TechTalk.
Technology made simple.
Over a cup of coffee. So the last question is, what's your favorite beverage? An unlisted one.
For me, it's coffee. I drink 10 coffee per day, so it's easy to answer.
I'm afraid I can't lie. People who know me will know it's Red Bull.
We haven't had, I think. It's the first time we have Red Bull. Good.
Yes.
Coffee, we have
you.
plenty of people.
Yeah.
Because
So-
people are shy and they don't want to say beer.
But we've had some people who
We had
said
some
beer.
people say-
There you go. So thank you so much.
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And that's all for today. This is Tech Talk, technology made simple over a cup of coffee. Don't miss out on any future episodes by hitting subscribe. Thank you for listening to this episode and see you in the next one.